The driver would be wrongly arrested. But the Parrott said something that changed everything. David Miller trembled as he felt the cold metal of handcuffs around his wrists. After 15 years of faithfully serving the Thompson family, he was being accused of stealing the inheritance of Mrs. Margaret, the 78-year-old woman he considered a second mother. That's when the green parrot on the porch began screaming desperately, repeating a phrase that made everyone freeze. she's lying, the money is mine," screeched Charlie, the parrot Mrs. Margaret had received from her late husband 20 years earlier. "Shut up, useless bird," shouted Patricia Thompson, Mrs. Margaret's daughter, while trying to cover the cage. David looked into his employer's eyes, who seemed confused and frightened, sitting in the brown leather armchair in the living room. The house in Beacon Hill, Boston, had never been the scene of such tension. "Mrs. Margaret, you know I would never do this," said David, his voice choked. "Of course you would," interrupted Patricia, waving a stack of papers. "Here are the documents my mother signed, transferring $200,000 to your bank account. She's no longer in a condition to make decisions, and you took advantage of that." The officer from the police precinct who had been called to the scene seemed embarrassed by the situation. David was known in the neighborhood as an honest man who had cared for Mrs. Margaret with affection since he started working as the family's personal driver. "Ma'am, we can resolve this civilly," said Officer Anderson, a middle-aged man with graying hair. "Let's clarify the facts." Mrs. Margaret stood up slowly, leaning on the wooden cane she used after suffering a fall the previous year. "Patricia, dear, why are you shouting? And why does David have those things on his hands?" asked the elderly woman, referring to the handcuffs. Patricia sighed impatiently. "Mother, I've explained 3 times. This man stole our money. He made you sign papers you shouldn't have." "But David is trustworthy. He takes me to the doctor, does the shopping, takes care of me when I'm sick." "Exactly why he managed to deceive you," retorted Patricia. Charlie the parrot remained agitated in the cage, repeating disjointed phrases that nobody fully understood. Sign here, she's lying, she's lying." David watched the scene with a broken heart. He had grown up in a humble family on the outskirts of Boston and had gotten that job through a referral from the church he attended. Mrs. Margaret had always treated him with respect and affection, including him in family Christmas parties and asking about his night accounting classes. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. Patricia had appeared at her mother's house just 1 week earlier, after nearly 2 years without any news. She claimed to be worried about Mrs. Margaret's mental state and wanted to take control of the family finances. "Officer, I have all the evidence here," said Patricia, handing over a folder full of documents. "My mother was diagnosed with mild cognitive decline by Dr. Peterson. She's no longer capable of making financial decisions." "That's not true," protested David. "Mrs. Margaret is lucid most of the time. She just has some normal age-related forgetfulness." "Oh, of course. And is it just coincidence that precisely when she's confused, you get her to sign documents transferring money to you?" Officer Anderson carefully leafed through the papers. Indeed, there were documents signed by Mrs. Margaret authorizing the transfer of a considerable sum to David Miller's account. "Mr. David, can you explain these documents?" David shook his head, genuinely confused. "I swear I don't know how this happened. Mrs. Margaret took me to the bank last week to sort out some pending matters, but I waited in the car. When she came out, she said she had taken care of some bureaucratic things." "Liar," accused Patricia. "You obviously influenced her to do this." At that moment, the front door opened and Dorothy entered, the housekeeper who worked at the house 3 times a week. She was a 60-year-old black woman with graying hair tied in a bun who had known the family for over a decade. "What's going on here?" asked Dorothy, startled to see David handcuffed. "Mrs. Dorothy!" exclaimed David with relief. "You can explain to them that I would never harm Mrs. Margaret." Patricia rolled her eyes. "Dorothy, this man stole money from my mother. He took advantage of her condition." Dorothy looked incredulously at David, then at Patricia. "That can't be true. David is a good boy. He always took good care of the boss. Then explain how he got my mother to sign documents transferring $200,000 to him." Dorothy turned pale. $200,000? My God! Mrs. Margaret, who had remained silent, began to cry softly. I don't understand anything. Why is everyone fighting? Where is my husband? He would know how to fix this. David's heart broke seeing the lady's confusion. Her husband, Dr. Robert Thompson, had passed away 3 years ago, and since then, Mrs. Margaret sometimes forgot he was no longer around. Charlie, sensing the lady's distress, began to repeat one of the late Dr. Robert's favorite phrases. Calm down, my love. Everything will be fine. Calm down, my love. Mrs. Margaret smiled through her tears. Look, he's imitating Robert. I miss him so much. Patricia huffed impatiently. Mom, focus. We're dealing with a serious situation here. Officer Anderson sensed there was something odd about that family dynamic. In his years of experience, he had developed an instinct for detecting when things weren't exactly as they seemed. Mrs. Patricia, when was the last time you visited your mother before this week? Patricia hesitated for a moment. Well, I live in Chicago. I have my own life, my commitments, but I always kept in touch by phone. What contact? Interrupted Dorothy. You called at most once a month, sometimes going 2 months without calling. That's not the point, retorted Patricia, clearly annoyed. David watched the argument in silence. He knew Patricia had distanced herself from the family after a nasty fight with her father about money shortly before Dr. Robert's passing. At the time, she wanted her parents to finance a dubious business she had gotten involved in. Officer, said David calmly, I have all the records of the places I took Mrs. Margaret in the last few months. Doctors, bank, supermarket, pharmacy. I can prove I always accompanied her only as a driver and caregiver. Records you made yourself. Of course they'll favor you, mocked Patricia. At that moment, Charlie began to imitate different voices, something he usually did when there were many people talking in the house. Sign here, Mom, it's for your own good, repeated the parrot in a female voice that made everyone look at him. Patricia turned pale. What? What did he say? Sign here, Mom. It's for your own good, repeated Charlie, this time more clearly. Mrs. Margaret widened her eyes. That voice... It sounds like yours, Patricia. Don't be ridiculous, Mom. It's just a parrot repeating random things. But Officer Anderson had caught Patricia's reaction. His experience told him there was something there that deserved investigation. Mrs. Patricia, were you here last week when the documents were signed? No, I arrived yesterday. Dorothy cleared her throat. Excuse me, but that's not true. I saw you leaving here last Friday. Patricia turned abruptly to Dorothy. You must be mistaken. I'm not mistaken at all. You were wearing that same beige suit you have on today. I thought it was strange because Mrs. Margaret hadn't told me you were coming. A tense silence filled the room. David felt a chill in his stomach. He was beginning to understand he had fallen victim to a setup. Patricia, said Mrs. Margaret slowly, you were here and didn't tell me. Mother, I came quickly to check on you. I didn't want to bother you. But you always bother, murmured Charlie, repeating a phrase he had heard from Dr. Robert during the last months of his life when he was irritated with his daughter. Patricia looked furiously at the parrot. That damned bird! Officer Anderson decided to deepen the investigation. Mrs. Patricia, I'll need to see your flight itinerary. If you say you arrived yesterday, you must have the receipts. This is ridiculous. I don't need to prove anything. He's the one who stole from my mother. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Dorothy went to answer and returned accompanied by a tall, dark-haired, well-dressed young man. Michael! Exclaimed Mrs. Margaret with joy. It was Michael Thompson, Mrs. Margaret's grandson and Patricia's son. He was 28 years old and worked as an engineer at a multinational company. He had graduated with financial help from his grandparents and maintained a close relationship with his grandmother despite living in another city. Grandma, said Michael, hugging Mrs. Margaret affectionately. Then he looked around, confused. Mom, what's going on? Why is David handcuffed? Patricia seemed even more uncomfortable with her son's arrival. Michael, darling, what a surprise. What are you doing here? I came to visit Grandma, but first explain to me what's happening here. Officer Anderson quickly reported the situation. Michael listened with growing attention. Let me get this straight, said Michael slowly. You're accusing David, who's been taking care of Grandma for 15 years, of stealing $200,000? That's exactly it, confirmed Patricia. Michael shook his head. Mom, that doesn't make sense. David is family. When Grandpa got sick that early morning, it was David who took him to the hospital. When Grandma fell and broke her arm, it was David who stayed with her all night at the hospital because you were traveling for work. Michael, you don't understand. People change. Money corrupts. David earns a decent salary, owns his own home, is finishing his accounting degree that Grandma helped pay for. Why would he risk all that to steal? Patricia didn't answer, but her discomfort was visible. Charlie, still agitated, began repeating a conversation he had overheard. Doctor, you need to issue the certificate. She can no longer make decisions. Doctor, you need to issue the certificate. Everyone looked at the parrot in silence. What certificate is that? Asked Michael. Patricia tried to sound casual. Oh, it's just that I took Grandma to the geriatrician for an evaluation. Dr. Peterson confirmed she has cognitive problems. Dr. Peterson? Asked Dorothy. But Mrs. Margaret has never been to that doctor. She only sees Dr. Wilson, who's been her geriatrician for 10 years. Michael and Officer Anderson exchanged significant looks. Mom, what's this about? Who is this Dr. Peterson? It's a specialist I consulted. A second opinion. And when was this appointment? Patricia hesitated. Last week. The same week you claim you weren't in Boston. A heavy silence filled the room. David began to see light at the end of the tunnel. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Mrs. Margaret, who had been following the conversation with increasing clarity, stood up leaning on her cane. Patricia, dear, I remember now. You came here last week, yes. You told me you had found a doctor who could help me with my memory. Grandma, go on, encouraged Michael. You took me to a very strange office. It wasn't like Dr. Wilson's. The man barely examined me, just asked some questions and said I had serious problems. And then? Asked Officer Anderson. Then Patricia took me to the bank. She said it was to sort out some urgent paperwork, that my Robert had left some pending matters. David felt his heart race. And what happened at the bank, Mrs. Margaret? Patricia said I needed to sign some papers to protect our money, that there was a risk of seizure because of Robert's debts. That's a lie, exploded Michael. Grandpa died without any debts. I helped settle the inheritance myself back then. Patricia was visibly nervous now. Michael, you don't understand the financial complexities. I'm an engineer. I'm not stupid. And besides, why would transferring money to David be a way to protect it? Because... Patricia couldn't finish the sentence. Charlie, as if sensing the tension in the air, repeated once more. She lies. She lies. The money is mine. Michael looked at his mother with an expression of deep disappointment. Mom, tell me you didn't do what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? You tricked Grandma into signing a money transfer to David, knowing that later you could accuse him of theft and keep the money for yourself. The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Anderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Patricia, I need you to come with me to give a formal statement. This situation needs to be properly clarified. I have rights. I'm her daughter. I'm trying to protect my mother. Protect her from whom? Asked Mrs. Margaret with a clarity in her voice that surprised everyone. From David, who takes care of me every day. Who takes me to the doctor when I'm sick. Who stays with me when I feel alone. Or protect me from you, who only shows up when you need money. The elderly woman's words cut like a blade. Patricia began to cry. Mom, I'm in serious financial trouble. I have huge debts. My business in Chicago went bankrupt. I was going to return the money, I swear. Return it from where, Mom? Asked Michael, incredulous. You were going to steal from your own grandmother and still blame an innocent man. David, still handcuffed, felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief at being cleared, sadness at seeing the family he loved falling apart. Officer Anderson signaled for his colleague to remove David's handcuffs. Mr. David, I apologize. You are free. David massaged his wrists, sore from the handcuffs. "Thank you, officer." Mrs. Margaret approached David with tears in her eyes. "David, my son, forgive me. I should have remembered. I should have defended you. Mrs. Margaret, you don't need to apologize. You were deceived, but I let you suffer. I saw you being humiliated and couldn't help you." David hugged the elderly woman affectionately. "What matters is that everything is clear now." Michael approached his mother. "Mum, you need professional help. What you did is inexcusable." Patricia continued crying. "I was desperate, Michael. The debts, the creditors threatening me. And your solution was to destroy an innocent person's life and steal from your own mother?" Officer Anderson interrupted. "Mrs. Patricia, you'll have to come with us. There are several legal matters to resolve here." As Patricia was led out of the house, Charlie repeated one last phrase that moved everyone. "Family is who loves. Family is who loves." It was a phrase that Dr. Robert used to say, especially in his later years when he noticed Patricia's distance. "Mrs." Margaret looked at David and Michael. "It's true. Family is those who love and care for you, not those who share the same blood." Michael hugged his grandmother. "Grandma, I'm going to stay here for a few days to sort out this whole mess. And we'll find a way to help my mother too, even after what she did." "You have a good heart, just like your grandfather," said Mrs. Margaret. David, still processing everything that had happened, sat in the armchair next to Mrs. Margaret's. "Mrs. Margaret, I don't know if I can keep working here after all this." The elderly woman took his hand. "David, you're the only family I have left. Please don't abandon me now." "But what about Patricia, when she gets out of these legal complications?" "Patricia will have to learn to live with the consequences of her actions, but that doesn't change the fact that you are essential in my life." Michael agreed. "David, please stay. Grandma is right. You're part of the family." Dorothy, who had observed everything in silence, approached. "David, my boy, I've seen you take care of this house and this family with more love than many sons would. You can't give up now." Charlie, finally calmer, hummed a song that Dr. Robert used to play on the piano. "It seems even Charlie agrees," smiled Mrs. Margaret. David took a deep breath. The temptation to walk away was strong, but looking at those people who truly cared about him, he realized he couldn't abandon them. "All right, I'll stay, but I want everything to be very clear from now on. No documents signed without Michael being present, no financial decisions without total transparency." "I completely agree," said Michael. "In fact, I was thinking about moving to Boston. My company has a branch here. That way I can be closer to Grandma and help with day-to-day things." Mrs. Margaret smiled for the first time since the whole mess had started. "What joy, my grandson. This house has been too quiet for too long." The following days were difficult. Patricia faced serious legal consequences, including charges of fraud and attempted embezzlement. Dr. Peterson turned out to be an acquaintance of hers who had agreed to forge a medical certificate in exchange for payment. Michael kept his promise and moved to Boston, occupying the room that had been his during childhood when he spent holidays at his grandparents' house. His presence brought new life to the house, especially for Mrs. Margaret, who loved having her grandson nearby. David continued in his duties, but now with a different status. Michael insisted on formalizing his position in the family through a legal document that recognized him as Mrs. Margaret's official caregiver, with clearly defined rights and responsibilities. "This way, there will be no doubts about your position in the family," explained Michael. One afternoon, about a month after the events, David was washing the car in the garage when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Patricia standing at the garage entrance. She looked visibly worn down, thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes. She had obtained probation while awaiting trial. "David," she said softly. "Patricia." The two stared at each other in silence for a few seconds. I came to apologize." David stopped cleaning the car and straightened up. "Talking to your mother would be more appropriate. I already spoke with her. She forgave me, of course. She always forgives me. Mrs. Margaret has too good a heart. That's true. And I took advantage of that my whole life." David sighed. "Patricia, why did you do it?" You always had everything. Education, opportunities, a family that loved you. Patricia leaned against the wall, seeming to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. Because I always wanted more. I always thought I deserved more. And when things got tough, instead of asking for help, I chose the easy way out. The easy way out. You almost destroyed my life. I know. And I know there's no excuse for this. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Really. David studied her face. He saw genuine remorse, but he also saw the traits of the selfish person who had tried to destroy him. Patricia, I accept your apology, but I can't forget what you did, and I can't trust you. I understand. Your mother loves you, and because of that she will always have hope that you'll change. But if you hurt her again, if you try anything like this, I will be here to protect her. Patricia nodded. I'm leaving Boston. I'm going to try to rebuild my life away from here. Maybe that's better for everyone. Maybe it is. She took a few steps toward the exit, then turned back. David? Yes? Take care of her for me. I know you already do, but take care of her. David nodded. Always. After Patricia left, David stood in the garage for a few minutes, processing the conversation. He felt a mix of emotions, anger for what she had done, pity for the state she was in, and a deep sadness at seeing a family falling apart. He heard footsteps and saw Michael approaching. Was that my mother? It was. How was she? Sorry. Destroyed. But sorry. Michael sighed. I still love my mother, you know, despite everything. But I can't trust her. That's understandable. Grandma is suffering because of this. She blames herself, thinks she failed as a mother. David shook his head. Mrs. Margaret was an exemplary mother. Patricia's choices are her responsibility, not your grandmother's. I know, but you know Grandma. She takes the blame for everything. The two walked back to the house. In the living room, they found Mrs. Margaret knitting in her armchair, with Charlie humming softly in the cage beside her. How are my two favorite men? She asked, smiling. We're fine, Grandma, replied Michael, kissing the top of her head. David sat in the armchair next to her. Mrs. Margaret, can I ask you a question? Of course, dear. Do you regret defending me, even knowing it caused problems in your family? Mrs. Margaret stopped knitting and looked directly into David's eyes. David, my son, family isn't just who you're born with. Family is who chooses to stay. You chose to stay here, to take care of me, to love me even when I was difficult. Patricia chose to distance herself whenever she could. But she's your daughter, and you are my son in my heart. What matters more, blood or love? Michael was moved by his grandmother's words. Grandma is right, David. You're more of a brother to me than many people who share the same blood. Charlie, as if wanting to join the conversation, repeated a phrase he had heard from Dr. Robert. The family we choose. The family we choose. Everyone laughed, easing the tension of the moment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Months passed. The household routine had settled into a new pattern. Michael worked during the day but always had lunch at home with his grandmother. David continued to care for Mrs. Margaret, but now with Michael's help with the heavier tasks. Dorothy had increased her frequency, now coming 4 times a week. She and David had developed an efficient partnership in caring for the house and Mrs. Margaret. One Saturday morning, David was in the garden trimming the rose bushes when he saw an unfamiliar car stop in front of the house. A young, well-dressed blonde woman got out. Excuse me, she said, approaching the gate. Can you help me? I'm looking for the Thompson family. Yes, this is the house. Can I help you? My name is Jennifer Parker. I'm a lawyer. I need to speak with Mrs. Margaret Thompson about a very important matter. David immediately became alert. After everything that had happened with Patricia, any stranger wanting to talk about important matters made him nervous. Could you explain what kind of matter, Ma'am? It's about an inheritance. May I speak with her? I'll get Michael. One moment. David entered the house and found Michael reading the newspaper in the living room. "Michael, there's a lawyer here wanting to speak with your grandmother about an inheritance." Michael immediately became alert. "After all that's happened, I don't trust anyone. Let's speak with her together." The two went out to meet the lawyer. Mrs. Margaret, curious about the commotion, had stepped out onto the porch. "Good morning," said Jennifer Parker. "Mrs. Margaret Thompson?" "Yes, that's me." "My name is Jennifer Parker Williams. I'm an attorney specializing in estates. I'm here representing a client who left a significant inheritance for you." Michael and David exchanged glances. "An inheritance?" asked Michael. "From whom?" "From Richard Stewart Miller. He passed away 6 months ago in Chicago." Mrs. Margaret looked confused. "Richard Stewart Miller? I don't know anyone by that name." Jennifer checked her notes. "According to the documents I have, he was the brother of David Miller, your driver." Everyone looked at David, who had turned pale. "My brother? But I don't have... I had an older brother, but we lost contact over 20 years ago." "That's exactly what I imagined," said Jennifer. "Mr. David Miller, son of Mary Miller and Joseph Miller, born March 15, 1975. "Yes, that's me." "But how—" "Your brother hired a private detective a few years ago to find you. He discovered you worked here and had been keeping an eye on your life from afar." David sat down in a chair, stunned. "Richard? My brother Richard is alive?" Was alive. Unfortunately, he passed away from cancer, but he left a very specific will." Jennifer opened a briefcase and took out some documents. "He left his entire estate, valued at approximately $500,000, divided into 2 parts, 50% for you, David, and 50% for Mrs. Margaret Thompson." "For me?" asked Mrs. Margaret, surprised. "Yes. According to the will, he observed for years how you treated your brother David like a son and decided you deserved to be rewarded for your kindness." David was in shock. "I can't accept this. Not my part, nor Mrs. Margaret's part." "David," said Michael, "why not?" Because I abandoned my brother. When our parents died, we argued about what to do with the house. I wanted to sell, he wanted to keep it. We ended up having a terrible fight, and each went our separate ways. I never tried to contact him again." "But he tried to find you," said Jennifer. "And according to a letter he left, he was very proud of the man you became." She handed a sealed envelope to David. "This letter is for you." With trembling hands, David opened the envelope and began to read silently. As he read, tears began to stream down his face. "David, dear, what does the letter say?" asked Mrs. Margaret affectionately. David wiped away the tears and, with a choked voice, began to read aloud. "My brother David, if you're reading this letter, it means I've already departed this life. I want you to know that I never stopped thinking about you for a single day. The fight we had was foolishness between 2 proud young men who didn't know how to handle the pain of losing our parents. I found out where you were 5 years ago and have been watching your life from afar. I learned how you take care of Mrs. Margaret, how she treats you like a son, how you became an honest and good man. Our parents would be proud. I always wanted a family like the one you found. That's why I decided to divide everything I achieved between you and the lady who gave you what I didn't know how to give, unconditional love. Use this money to be happy and to repay the love you've received. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to find you in person. With eternal love, your brother Richard." The silence that followed was broken by the emotional tears of everyone present. Mrs. Margaret stood up and hugged David. "See, my son? Even your brother recognized what we have here is special." Michael was also moved. "David, now you have the resources to do whatever you want. Continue studying. Start your own business." David shook his head. "I already have everything I want. I have a family that loves me, a home where I'm welcome, a purpose in life. But the money will be used to take better care of all of us. We can renovate the house, hire more help for Mrs. Margaret, ensure she has every possible comfort." Jennifer Parker smiled. "Your brother would have been happy to know you reacted this way." After resolving all bureaucratic matters with the lawyer, the family gathered in the living room to process everything that had happened. "David," said Mrs. Margaret, Do you realize this is a sign? A sign of what? That you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Your brother watched you for years and decided this family deserved to be rewarded. He validated our choice to love you. Michael agreed. It's as if he gave an official blessing to our family. Charlie, who had remained quiet during the entire conversation with the lawyer, suddenly began singing a song none of them recognized. "What song is that, Charlie?" asked Mrs. Margaret. David's eyes widened. "It's a song my mother used to sing to me and Richard when we were children. How does he—" Jennifer Parker, who was still present finalizing the documents, smiled. "Your brother asked me to teach that song to the parrot before delivering the inheritance. He wanted it to be a way of showing he was truly watching over your life." David began to cry again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and peace. With the inheritance, several improvements were made to the house. Mrs. Margaret got a ground-floor bedroom so she wouldn't need to climb stairs, with a bathroom adapted for her age. The garden was renovated with plants she loved and a special space for Charlie to stay outdoors when the weather was nice. David used part of his money to finish his accounting degree, and with Michael's guidance created a small accounting office at home to serve local small business owners. This way he could work and take care of Mrs. Margaret at the same time. Michael was promoted at his company and decided definitively that Boston was his place. He's dating a co-worker, Sarah, who was quickly adopted by the family and loved spending weekends at the house with everyone. Dorothy was officially promoted to housekeeper, with full salary and all labor rights up to date. She brought her 16-year-old granddaughter, Emma, to meet the family, and Mrs. Margaret immediately offered to pay for her studies. "Everyone deserves opportunities," she said. One afternoon, David was organizing the inheritance documents when he found a photo Jennifer Parker had brought. It was a picture of him with Richard when they were children, which his brother had kept all these years. In the photo, the two were hugging, smiling in front of the house where they grew up. David didn't remember anyone taking that picture, but the image brought back good memories he had buried, along with the pain of separation. "Was that your brother?" asked Mrs. Margaret, coming up behind him. "Yes, we were very close as children. He looks like you." Everyone said that. They said we were almost twins, despite the age difference. Mrs. Margaret sat beside David. "Do you miss him?" "Now that I know he was okay, that he had a good life, I feel less guilty. But I miss the years we lost fighting over silly things. Life sometimes separates people who love each other, but true love always finds a way to show itself. Look how he took care of you even from afar." David smiled. "You always know what to say to make me feel better. That's what mothers are for, my son." 6 months after the inheritance, the Thompson house had become a true home for everyone. Mornings began with David making breakfast, while Michael read the news to Mrs. Margaret. Dorothy arrived humming, and Charlie responded with his own songs. Sarah, Michael's girlfriend, had become a constant presence. She was a kindergarten teacher and brought a young, joyful energy to the house. Mrs. Margaret loved listening to her tell stories about the children from school. "Grandma," Michael said one morning, "Sarah and I were talking—" "Oh, I already know. You're going to get married." Michael laughed. "How did you guess?" "My son, a 78-year-old woman, can tell when two people are truly in love." "And what do you think?" "I think Sarah is a wonderful girl and that you're going to be very happy." "When is the wedding?" "We haven't set a date yet. We wanted to talk to you first." "Why did you need to talk to me?" "Because we want to get married here, in the garden of the house, with the whole family present." Mrs. Margaret was moved. "It would be an honor to have my grandson's wedding here." David, who was listening to the conversation from the kitchen, smiled. The house was truly coming back to life. The wedding preparations kept the whole family busy. Mrs. Margaret took on the role of head organizer, with David as her right-hand man, and Dorothy taking care of all the practical details. "David," Mrs. Margaret said one afternoon, while choosing flowers for the decorations, "have you ever thought about getting married?" "Me, no, Mrs. Margaret. I'm perfectly fine as I am. But you're a young, handsome man. You have a stable life. Don't you want to start a family?" "I already have a family. I have you, Michael, Dorothy, even Charlie." "That's no excuse not to have your own family too," David laughed. "Are you trying to set me up?" "Maybe. I have some friends with very interesting single granddaughters." "Mrs. Margaret?" "What? A 78-year-old woman can't dream of seeing her heart's son happy and fulfilled in every way? Actually, David had met someone recently. It was Patricia, a nurse at the hospital where Mrs. Margaret had her checkups. They had talked a few times, and she showed interest, but David was still unsure about how to balance a relationship with his responsibilities. As if reading his thoughts, Mrs. Margaret said, "If it's because of me that you don't want to get involved with anyone, you can put that out of your head. I'm not going to live forever, and I want to know that you'll have someone special by your side." "Mrs. Margaret, don't talk like that." "David, I'm 78 years old. I'm not planning to leave tomorrow, but I'm not eternal either. And one of the things that worries me most is leaving you alone." David stopped arranging the flowers and looked into her eyes. "Mrs. Margaret, even when you're no longer here, I will never be alone. You taught me what family love is. No one can take that away from me. But I want you to have more. I want you to have children, grandchildren, that you experience the joy of seeing a new generation grow up." That night, David kept thinking about the conversation. Maybe Mrs. Margaret was right. Maybe it was time to open himself up to new possibilities. Michael and Sarah's wedding took place on a golden autumn afternoon. The garden was decorated with Mrs. Margaret's favorite flowers, and Charlie had been placed in a special cage decorated with white and gold ribbons. David looked impeccable in a navy blue suit that Michael had insisted on buying for him. Mrs. Margaret wore a light blue dress that had belonged to her late husband, which she saved for special occasions. Dorothy and Emma, her granddaughter, were helping with the final touches. The young woman had fallen in love with the house and the family, and was already talking about studying nursing to care for people like Mrs. Margaret. When the ceremony began, everyone was emotional. Michael was radiant, Sarah looked beautiful in a simple yet elegant dress, and Mrs. Margaret couldn't stop smiling. In the middle of the ceremony, Charlie decided to join in by humming the song that Dr. Robert used to play on the piano. Everyone laughed and were moved at the same time. During the party, David was serving drinks to the guests when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned and saw Emily, the nurse. "Emily, you came." "Michael invited me. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not. I'm glad you're here." They talked throughout the party. Emily was charmed by the family's story and the affection everyone showed David. "You have a beautiful family," she said. "Thank you. They mean everything to me." "Michael told me part of your story, how you came to work here and ended up becoming part of the family. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." "And now? Do you plan to stay here forever?" David thought for a moment. "I don't know about forever. Mrs. Margaret is getting older and will need more specialized care. Maybe there will come a time when it's better for her to go to a place with more medical facilities. And you? Me? I'll be wherever she is, but I'm also starting to think that maybe it's time to build something of my own too." Emily smiled. "Something of your own? Like what?" "Maybe a family of my own. Mrs. Margaret is always on my case about that." "And what do you think of the idea?" David looked into her eyes. "I think it depends on finding the right person." It was the beginning of a romance that brought even more happiness to the Thompson household. Emily integrated naturally into the family, and her experience as a nurse was very helpful in taking better care of Mrs. Margaret. 1 year after Michael's wedding, David and Emily also got married, in a smaller but equally emotional ceremony in the same garden. This time, Charlie sang the whole song without stopping, as if he knew it was a special occasion. Mrs. Margaret was radiant. Seeing David happy and fulfilled in every aspect of life was one of her greatest dreams. "Now all that's left is for you to give me some great-grandchildren," she said to both couples at the end of the party. "Mrs. Margaret," laughed Sarah. "What? A woman has a right to dream." Emily moved into the house, occupying a room that had been specially prepared for the couple. The household dynamics adjusted naturally to accommodate one more person. With Emily's medical expertise, Mrs. Margaret received even better care. They established a routine of light exercise, adjusted her diet, and created an even safer environment for the elderly woman. 2 years later, the first grandchild was born. Michael Jr., the son of Michael and Sarah, brought indescribable joy to Mrs. Margaret. I knew I would live to see my great-grandchildren, she said, holding the baby in her arms. Charlie, fascinated by the baby, began humming lullabies he had learned from television shows. 6 months later, it was David and Emily's turn to announce that they were also expecting a baby. "Mrs. Margaret," David said, "you're going to have 2 great-grandchildren just months apart. What a blessing. This house is going to be full of children running around. Are you sure you can handle all that commotion? David, my son, after everything we've been through together, you still doubt my resilience." Emily's pregnancy was smooth and Mrs. Margaret enjoyed every moment. She knitted little clothes, prepared the layette, and was already planning how to care for 2 babies. "Dorothy," she said one afternoon, "I think we'll need more help when the babies are born." "I've already thought of that, Mrs. Margaret. My sister Barbara is looking for work. She has experience with children." "Perfect. Bring her to talk with us." The Thompson household was preparing for a new phase, the baby phase, with children's laughter, first steps in the garden where so many important stories had already happened. One evening, David was reading in the living room when Mrs. Margaret joined him. "David, have you ever stopped to think about how our lives have changed since that terrible day with Patricia?" "I think about it sometimes. It feels like it was in another lifetime. If someone had told me back then that 2 years later we'd be here, waiting for the birth of 2 great-grandchildren, in a house full of love and happiness, I wouldn't have believed it. Bad things sometimes happen to show us the value of good things." "You're right, and you know what? I'm grateful for going through all that." "How so?" "Because that was when our true family came together. It was when Michael decided to stay close, when you showed your loyalty, when we discovered who the people were that really cared about us." David nodded thoughtfully. "And today we're all here, growing together." "Exactly. Patricia gave me a wonderful son, Michael, but you gave me something I didn't know was missing, the certainty that family isn't destiny, it's a choice." Charlie, who was sleeping peacefully in his cage, woke up for a moment and murmured softly, "Family is choice, family is choice." Mrs. Margaret and David laughed. "Even Charlie learned the lesson," she said. The birth of Margaret, daughter of David and Emily, was one of the most emotional days in the house. Mrs. Margaret insisted that the girl be given her name. "She's the continuation of our family," she said, holding the baby with infinite care. Now the house had 2 babies, 2 young couples, a loving matriarch, a dedicated housekeeper, a studious teenager, and a parrot who had become the family's musical chronicler. Mornings were busy, with Michael leaving for work while Sarah took care of Michael Jr. David divided his time between his home accounting office and helping Emily with little Margaret. Mrs. Margaret was in her element, caring for her great-grandchildren, giving advice to the young mothers and supervising everything with the affection of someone who had waited their whole life for that moment. "David," she said one afternoon while they watched the children playing in the garden, "do you remember what you told me on your first day of work?" "I don't remember. What did I say?" "You said you needed this job because you wanted to build a decent life. You never forgot that." David smiled. "And I did, didn't I? You achieved much more than that. You built a family, a home, a legacy. We built it, Mrs. Margaret, together." "That's true, together." Charlie, now an elderly but still vibrant parrot, hummed a new song he had learned from the children's programs playing in the house. "Look at that," laughed Mrs. Margaret. "Even Charlie is modernizing to keep up with the children." 5 years after the events that almost destroyed the family, the Thompson house was a true example of how love and perseverance can overcome any adversity. David had graduated in accounting, and his office was thriving. He served not only small businesses, but also other families in the area who needed help with financial matters. Michael had been promoted to regional manager of his company. He and Sarah were planning to give Michael Jr. a little brother. Emily continued working as a nurse, but now part-time, to better care for little Margaret and help Mrs. Margaret. Dorothy had officially become the house supervisor, with Barbara, her sister, as her assistant. Emma, now 21 years old, had started nursing school, which Mrs. Margaret insisted on paying for. "It's my investment in the future," she would say. "When I get very old, I'll have my own private nurse." Mrs. Margaret, at 83, was surprisingly well. The family's loving care, the children's joy, and her life's purpose had given her a vitality that amazed the doctors. "Mrs. Margaret," said Dr. Wilson during a routine checkup, "your test results are better than they were 5 years ago. What are you all doing?" "I'm living, Doctor. Finally, I'm truly living." One Sunday afternoon, the whole family was gathered in the garden for the weekly barbecue that Michael had instituted. The children played on the grass, the adults chatted animatedly, and Charlie supervised everything from his special outdoor cage. "David," said Michael, "do you remember when we thought our family was finished?" "I do. It seemed like there was no hope. And look now, we have 2 kids running around, another on the way, everyone professionally fulfilled. And a grandmother who never stops meddling in everyone's life," laughed Sarah. "I heard that," shouted Mrs. Margaret from the porch, "and I'll keep meddling as long as I'm alive." Everyone laughed. It was a threat they all hoped she would carry out for many years to come. Charlie, inspired by the joy of the moment, began to sing a song that no one recognized, but that was incredibly beautiful. "Where did he get that song from?" asked Emily. "I think he's composing," said David. "It's the soundtrack of our family." As the sun set in the garden of the Thompson house, painting everything in golden hues, David looked around and felt immense gratitude for every difficult moment he had endured, because it was precisely through those hardships that he found his true family. Mrs. Margaret, watching the activity from the porch, murmured a silent prayer of thanks. She had been through moments of despair, betrayal, and doubt, but in the end, she discovered that true love always finds a way to prevail. Michael, playing with his son on his lap, thought about how crucial his decision to stay close to his grandmother had been. Not only had it saved the family from destruction, but he had found his own happiness in the process. Sarah, pregnant with their second child, felt blessed to have married not just Michael, but that whole extraordinary family that welcomed her as a daughter. Emily, watching David push Margaret on the swing he had built in the garden, knew she had made the right choice. That man and that family were everything she had ever dreamed of. Dorothy and Barbara were preparing dessert in the kitchen, talking about how the house had changed for the better. Emma was studying in the living room, surrounded by the love and support of people who had become her second family. And Charlie, the family's musical chronicler, kept singing his mysterious song, as if he knew he was documenting one of the happiest moments in that house full of love. When the stars began to appear in the sky, everyone gathered on the porch for Mrs. Margaret's nightly ritual, giving thanks for the day that had passed and asking for protection for the night ahead. "Today I give thanks," she said, her voice emotional, "for having a family that chose me as much as I chose you. I'm thankful for the children who fill this house with joy, for the adults who have made my last years the best of my life, and even for Charlie, who keeps all our secrets and songs." "Amen," they all said in chorus. Charlie, as always, had the last word. Family is love. Family is love. Family is love. And in that house in Beacon Hill, in Boston, a family that had been forged not by blood, but by the deliberate choice to love and care for one another, continued writing their story of resilience, love, and happiness. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. Do you believe David made the right decision by forgiving Patricia? Which moment touched you the most? Leave your comment and especially subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this one.